The river had been running high for 3 days when she arrived in Colton, and the mud on the main street was the kind that pulled at your boots and did not let go without an argument. She had come by stage from Billings, 7 hours on a bench seat, with a drummer who talked about belt buckles, and a woman traveling to her sisters who had fallen asleep before they cleared the first pass and snored with a sincerity that made the drummer stop talking. She had not minded either of them. She had looked out the window at the grassland going brown in the October cold and thought about the letter in her coat pocket, and whether she had read it correctly or only read what she had wanted it to say. She had read it correctly. She knew that. She was 31 years old and had not misread a plain document since she was 19. And she had learned from that particular mistake in ways that did not bear revisiting. The stage stopped in front of a building that served as post office, telegraph office, and, by the look of the 3 men sitting on the porch bench, as a place to watch things happen on the street. She stepped down without help. Her bag was canvas, old, the kind of old that had stopped looking worn and started looking deliberate. She set it on the boardwalk and looked at the town. It was not small. That surprised her. She had expected small. The letter had said working ranch north of Colton, as though Colton were a footnote, a place you passed through rather than a place. But the main street ran for 4 or 5 blocks, and there was a bank with a stone front, and 2 hotels, and a mercantile with a striped awning that had gone gray from weather, a barber shop, a milliner, a church at the east end with a square bell tower. People moved through the street in the ordinary way of a town that had been doing this long enough to take itself for granted. She picked up her bag and walked to the mercantile. Someone there would know where she was going. Someone there always did. The man behind the counter was not old, but had the patience of someone who had worked in the same room for 20 years and stopped expecting surprises. He was cutting a length of rope when she came in, and he finished the cut before he looked up. "Help you find something?" "I'm looking for a ranch," she said. "The Alderman place, north of town." He set the rope on the counter, looked at her the way people in small towns look at you when you have confirmed something they already suspected. "Ledger Alderman's," he said. "Yes." He gave her the directions without hesitation. North Road, 4 miles, left at the creek, crossing where the cottonwoods grew in a line. The gate had a letter A cut into the post, though the paint had gone. He told her the road would be soft from the rain and asked if she was riding or walking. "I'll need to arrange a wagon," she said. He sent her to the livery 2 doors down. The man there, whose name was Coop, and who did not offer this information but wore it on his face, arranged a wagon for the price of $2 and a deposit on the horse, a chestnut mare with a patient disposition and a tendency to drift right on an open road. She drove herself. She had been driving wagons since she was 12. The mare drifted right twice, and she corrected her without ceremony, and they reached an understanding by the time the town was out of sight behind her. The grassland was wide, and the sky was wider. The mountains to the west held the last of the morning light on their upper ridges. Everything below was in the flat gray of cloud cover, the land the color of old straw. The cottonwoods at the creek crossing had gone gold, the leaves hanging still in the cold air. She turned left and followed the track and came to the gate with the faded A and stopped the mare and looked at what was ahead. The house was not what she had expected, though she could not have said what she had expected. It was 2 stories, white once, now the color of old cream where the paint had held, and bare silverwood where it hadn't. A porch across the front. Barn to the left, further back, larger than the house. A bunkhouse beyond that, small smoke from its chimney. A man was splitting wood at the far end of the yard. She did not call out. She drove through the gate and stopped the wagon near the porch and set the brake and climbed down. The wood splitting stopped. He came across the yard the way a man comes towards something he's been expecting but has not let himself think about too directly. He was not what the letter had prepared her for. The letter had been factual. Widower, 2 children, 8 and 11, looking for someone to manage the house and see to the children's education through the winter months. Wage fair. Room provided. References requested. She had provided hers. He had responded that they were satisfactory. None of that was wrong. It was just that a letter could not carry the way a man moved, or the set of his shoulders, or the fact that when he was within speaking distance, he stopped and looked at her the way someone looks at a problem they have been trying to solve and are not certain yet whether the solution is going to hold. "You're the one from Iowa," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her bag, then at the wagon, then at her. "Only the one bag," he said. "That's all I brought." He nodded as though she had confirmed something. "I'll get the mare settled," he said. Porch doors unlocked. He took the mare's lead without ceremony and went toward the barn. She stood in the yard for a moment holding her bag, looking at the house. The porch door was unlocked. She went in. The house was clean in the way a house is clean when a man has put deliberate effort into it for a specific occasion, and then stopped. The front room had a table, 4 chairs, a stone fireplace with the ashes cleared out, a rag rug, a shelf with books, a lamp, a tin cup someone had left and not taken back to the kitchen. On the mantel, a small framed photograph, a woman, young, serious-faced, sitting straight in the way of formal photographs. She did not look at it for long. The kitchen was through the door on the right. She went in and looked at what there was. A good stove, better than she had expected. A Windsor with 2 ovens and warming racks. A dry sink. Shelves of provisions, orderly but sparse. Root vegetables in a crate by the back door. Half a smoked ham in cloth on the hook above the work table. She had cooked for farmhands at 17. She had managed a boarding house kitchen at 23 until the owner sold the building out from under the operation. She had done other things in between that she did not count as cooking, but had involved feeding people in rooms that were not designed for it. What was here was workable. More than workable. She found an apron on the hook beside the stove and put it on. The children appeared at supper. She heard them before she saw them. Feet on the stairs, a brief murmured argument in the hallway, and then the door to the kitchen opened and they were there. The older one was a girl, 11, with dark hair cut straight across and the kind of face that made you think she had already decided not to show you much. The younger was a boy, 8, with a gap in his front teeth and the look of someone who had not yet learned to be careful. The girl's name was Sable, the boy's name was Rue. "You're not what I thought," the boy said. "Rue," the girl said, in a tone that meant she had said this or something like it many times. "It's all right," she said. She set the plate of bread on the table. "What did you think?" He considered this with the seriousness of a person for whom the question was genuinely interesting. "Older," he said. "Mrs. Aldous was older. Rue, she was." The girl sat down. She placed her hands in her lap and looked at the table and then briefly at the visitor in their kitchen. Her expression was not hostile. It was the expression of someone who has learned to wait before committing to anything. He came in from outside and stopped in the doorway and looked at the table. She had set 4 places. He looked at that for a moment, then came to the table and sat. The children sat. She brought the pot from the stove, a pork and root vegetable stew, the kind of thing a cold evening required, and that used what she had found without wasting any of it. Nobody said much. Rue asked whether the stew had onions in it. She said it did. He ate it anyway, which she noted. The girl ate quietly and kept her eyes on her plate. He ate the way a man eats when he is hungry and did not stop until the bowl was empty. She ate standing at the counter because there had been 4 chairs and she had set 4 places and she was not yet sure which one was hers. After supper, the children went up. He stayed at the table with his coffee. She washed the dishes and did not hurry at it. "The room's off the kitchen," he said. "Through there." He meant the door she had not opened yet. "Small," he said. "Warmer than you'd think, though. The stove shares the wall." "All right," she said. He said nothing for a while. Outside, the wind had come up, and the cottonwoods along the creek were making their sound, the dry rushing of 1,000 leaves that were almost gone. She stacked the last of the dishes. "Rue cried for a week when the last one left," he said. He was not looking at her when he said it. He was looking at the table. "He won't tell you that." She dried her hands on the apron. "The last one left because she found a position in town, because my daughter made things difficult." He says it the same way you'd say the weather has been dry, a fact with no performance attached. She looked at the back of his head. He still had not turned around. "Yes." She folded the apron and hung it back on the hook. "She's protecting something," she said. He was quiet for a long moment. "The photograph on the mantel," he said. "I saw it." He picked up his cup and looked at it. "Her mother, I know," she said. She did not say she had guessed. She had. He turned then, for the first time since supper, and looked at her across the kitchen. It was the first time she had the full weight of it, the look of a man who has been managing alone long enough that he has stopped expecting help but not stopped needing it. She held his gaze for one beat and then picked up the lamp from the counter. "Good night," she said. He nodded. She went through the door he had indicated and found the room. It was small. He had been right about that. A bed frame with a new-looking mattress, a chest of drawers, a hook on the back of the door. One window, covered by a piece of fabric tacked over the frame. Not quite the right size, the kind of improvised curtain a man puts up when he remembers it is necessary and uses whatever is on hand. She set her bag down. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the window. The fabric was burlap, rough and brown, and doing its job adequately. She lay down without unpacking. She listened to him bank the fire in the kitchen. She listened to his boots on the stairs. She listened to the sound of the house settling around her, familiar sounds. A house was a house. The language of joists and window frames was the same everywhere. She had slept in more rooms than she could accurately count. She slept. In the morning she was before the light. She remade the fire in the kitchen stove and put the coffee on and looked through what was in the pantry with more care than she had the night before. There were gaps in what he had. Not from carelessness, she didn't think, but from not knowing. A man feeding himself and 2 children learns what they will eat and stops there. Nobody had told him that you needed more than that. She started a list on the back of an envelope she found in the table drawer. He came down at first gray light, stopped in the kitchen doorway, looked at the coffee, looked at her. She was sitting at the table with the envelope in front of her. "I'll need to go to the mercantile," she said, "when it's convenient." He came to the table and looked at the list. He did not pick it up. He read it where it was, standing slightly back, his hands at his sides. She watched his face and he did not change much, but there was a moment, brief, when something that might have been relief moved through it. "Coop can take you Thursday," he said. "He comes out for the mail anyway. That's fine." He poured coffee and went out. She heard him cross the porch, heard the door of the barn, and then the ordinary sounds of morning work rising up around the house like water. The children came down at different times. Rue first, unorganized, his boots on the wrong feet and needing to be told. He accepted this information without embarrassment and fixed them and ate his oatmeal with the focus of a person who had decided that eating was worth the attention. She asked him what he was studying, and he listed things with the randomness of an 8-year-old who has absorbed information without filing it. Arithmetic and states and the war, which one there's only one, and cursive writing, which he hated. She asked him to show her his cursive. He went and got the tablet with the expression of someone who expected judgment and was prepared for it. She looked at what he had done. It was not terrible. She told him so, and he seemed surprised in a way that suggested he had been told otherwise. Sable came down when Rue was finishing. She sat at the far end of the table and ate without speaking. She was not rude. She was simply distant in the precisest way of a person who has decided that distance is the appropriate response to a situation and is going to maintain it. She did not try to bridge it. She refilled the coffee and did the breakfast dishes and noted, without remarking on it, that Sable's bowl was placed in the basin with care, not dropped or pushed. That was something. The week passed in the rhythm of the work. She cooked, cleaned, managed the children through their lessons in the morning. The materials that he had ordered and that arrived in pieces by mail and that she supplemented with what she had brought. A grammar primer. A small book of arithmetic with her own notations in the margins from years of use. She learned the house. The second stair tread creaked. The back door latch had to be lifted slightly before it would catch. The stove's right rear burner ran hotter than the dial said. She cataloged these things without meaning to. The way you learn a language you've heard in pieces for years, and one day realize you've been understanding it. He was in the house for meals and for the hour after supper, and sometimes she heard him in the kitchen late, after the children were asleep, not making noise exactly but present, the sound of the chair, the lamp, the occasional turning of a page. She did not come out. It was not her kitchen at that hour. She was still finding out what was hers. Sable thawed by increments too small to notice, and then all at once. It happened on a Thursday when Coop had come and gone, and she had returned from Colton with provisions and a bolt of muslin she had paid for herself, and which she had carried in and set on the kitchen table without explanation. Sable had been at the table with her lessons. She looked at the bolt of muslin and then at her. "What's that for?" Sable asked. "Curtain," she said. "If you have any preferences about color or pattern, I'll need to know before I cut." Sable looked at the muslin. It was undyed, plain cream. "Mama had blue ones," she said. Her voice was even. She was delivering information. "What kind of blue?" Sable thought about it. "Like the sky right before it's not blue anymore," she said. "Like when it gets darker at the edge." She folded her hands on the table. "I can't match that with what's in Colton," she said. "But I can get closer with the right dye. Do you want me to try?" Sable looked at her for the first time with something other than careful management. "Yes," she said. Then, after a moment, "Please." She nodded and picked up the muslin and went to her room. Behind her, she heard the pen on paper as Sable went back to her lessons. The dye came from the dry goods counter at the Mercantile on her second trip to town, which was not with Coop, but with him, because he had business at the bank and Coop was unavailable, and the children were in the care of the bunkhouse cook for the morning. He drove. She sat on the bench seat on the right side. The chestnut mare had the same tendency to drift. He corrected her without ceremony, and she noted that the mare corrected faster for him than for her, which she filed away without judgment. The mountains to the west were white above the tree line now. The road was frozen at the edges and soft in the center, and the wagon moved through the ordinary imperfection of a late October morning in Montana. They did not talk for the first mile. She had learned in the weeks here that his silence was not the same as the silence she had lived around before. She had known men who were silent because they were angry, and men who were silent because they were absent from themselves, and men who were silent because they had decided that nothing they said would come out right, and they had stopped trying. His was none of those. It was the silence of a man who did not speak unless he had something to say, and was not interested in filling the air between people with noise for the sake of noise. She understood this. She had been called cold for understanding it. She had stopped explaining. "Sable told me about the curtains," he said. She had not expected that. She looked at the road. "I'm waiting for the dye to come," she said. "She told me what color. I know what color," she told me. He was quiet for a moment. "You didn't have to do that. It's not hard to do," she said. He turned the mare at the bridge, and the town came visible. "She hasn't talked about her mother's things," he said. "Not since the first month. She told me once that the curtains weren't right. I bought new ones." "Wrong kind of wrong," she said. She could see that. A girl who had watched her father try and try again to replicate something irreplaceable and watched him get it wrong not through failure of effort but through the impossibility of the task. She didn't want replacements, she said. No, she wanted someone to ask what color. He did not say anything to that. He pulled the wagon up in front of the Mercantile and set the brake. She climbed down without waiting for his hand, and he came around the wagon anyway, arriving a beat after she had already landed, and there was a brief moment where they were standing closer than the situation required. And he stepped back one pace, and she stepped forward one pace, and they ended up in the same amount of space as before. She went into the Mercantile. The dye was on the third shelf, 3 shades of blue, and she held each one up to the light from the window and tried to think of a sky at the edge of the hour Sable had described. None of them were right. One of them was close. She picked the one that was close. He found her at the counter, and she was paying for the dye and a length of cord, and 3 buttons she had no immediate use for, but that had been a better price than she would see again. He did not ask what they were for. He stood beside her while the merchant wrote the receipt, and then they went back out into the cold. "I need 20 minutes at the bank," he said. "I'll wait." She walked down the main street. She was not browsing, she was thinking. She turned a thought over about the color of the dye, and whether the curtains, once they were finished, would mean to Sable what she wanted them to mean, or whether they would mean something different, something she couldn't calculate. She had made this kind of mistake before, trying to repair something and making instead a new kind of wrong. She was trying not to do that here. She was aware of the risk of becoming another thing this family had to outlast. When he came back from the bank, he found her standing outside the harness shop, looking at a pair of work gloves in the window. "Those are Min's," he said. "I know," she said. "Mine have a hole." He went into the shop. She stayed outside. He came back with a pair of gloves. Not the ones in the window, but a different pair, smaller, lined. He held them out. She looked at them, then at him. "I have money," she said. "I know you do." He held them out. She took them. They were lined in something soft, sheepskin maybe, and fit better than she had expected. She folded the cuffs over and said nothing. He put his hands in his pockets and looked at the street. "Rue's asked me twice if you're staying past spring," he said. She smoothed the left glove at the wrist. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I didn't know." She nodded. "That's an honest answer." "It is." He paused. "Is it still true?" She looked at the gloves, then at the street. The town was conducting its mourning. A woman with a basket, a dog crossing near the post office, a child on the step of the hotel eating something wrapped in paper. "Ordinary. I don't know yet," she said. "That's an honest answer, too." He looked at her, once direct, and then looked away. "All right," he said. They walked back to the wagon. The curtains took 4 days. She boiled the muslin in the dye twice to get the depth right, and then rinsed it in the cold water from the pump and hung it in the kitchen to dry where it turned the morning, light pale blue when the sun came through it. Sable walked through the kitchen the first morning and stopped. She looked at the hanging fabric. She touched the corner of it. She did not say anything. She went onto the table and sat down with her breakfast and kept her face the way she always kept it, set and private. But at noon she came to the kitchen doorway and said, "When will they be up?" "End of the week," she said. "I need to finish the hems." Sable nodded. She went back to her lessons. End of the week, she put the curtains in Sable's room first. She had not been asked to. She had measured the windows in there and cut accordingly, and she put them up on a Monday morning when Sable was outside with Rue watching him chase a barn cat that had no intention of being caught. When Sable came back in and went upstairs, she heard the footsteps stop, the particular stop of a person who has encountered something unexpected in a space they know well. She was at the stove when Sable came back down. The girl stood in the doorway. "They're not the same," Sable said. "No," she said. "They're not." Sable was quiet. "But they're close," she said. "I tried for close." The girl looked at her for a long moment. Her face was doing something it did not usually do, something that was still too small to name, but that was there. "Thank you," she said. Then she turned and went back upstairs. She turned back to the stove. Outside, she could hear Rue still failing to catch the cat. She heard him fall, heard the brief silence of someone deciding whether the fall was worth crying about, heard the decision come back negative. She made no sound at all, but something in her, some carefully held thing, shifted by a degree it was not planning to shift. The first hard snow came on a Wednesday. She heard it before she saw it, the particular silence that arrives before weather, the way the house changed its sounds, quieter at the eaves. She got up in the dark and dressed and went to the kitchen. He had already been to the barn and back. His boots by the door were wet. Coffee on the stove, fresh, made not long ago. She poured 2 cups and put one on the counter near his usual place. He came in when the light was barely begun, knocked the snow from his coat, hung it on the peg. She was at the table with her cup. He looked at the second cup on the counter. He picked it up. He stood at the window and looked out at the yard going white and even. "Came in fast," he said. "The mountains warned it," she said. She had watched them the day before, the way the clouds built differently there, heavier and lower. He looked at her. It was the kind of look that asks a question it is not ready to ask outright. She had been aware of this for some time now. She was not unaware of herself in it. She was not pretending not to notice. She was being careful in the way you are careful with something you have decided you cannot afford to break again. "Rue asked me again," he said. She looked at her cup. "I heard him ask you." A pause. "He's not subtle." "No." She looked up. "But he's not wrong to ask." He turned slightly from the window. "Not all the way, just enough." "The room off the kitchen," he said. "It's a small room." "It is," she said. "There's a larger one, the one at the end of the hall. It's being used for storage, but it doesn't have to be." She was quiet. Outside, the snow was still coming down, steady and without particular urgency, the way weather came in this valley, as though it had all the time in the world and intended to use it. "That would be for staying," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," he said. It would. She held her cup. She thought about the room at the end of the hall, which she had not been in, but which she knew was there, which she had understood. For weeks now was a question being held in reserve. She thought about Sable's curtains and the gap in Rue's teeth and the barn cat that had finally been caught on Sunday evening and was now living an inexplicably pampered life in the tack room. She thought about gloves that fit. "I'd need to paint it," she said. He said nothing for a moment. Then, "What color?" She looked at him. He was watching her with that quality he had, the measuring, unhurried quality that had been in his face the very first day when she drove through the gate, as though he had decided a long time ago to take the measure of things before he spoke about them. "I don't know yet," she said. He nodded. He turned back to the window, sipped his coffee. Outside, Rue's boots appeared at the top of the porch steps, and the door banged open the way it always banged. And he came into the kitchen with snow in his hair and the expression of someone who had something important to report and could not decide which part to report first. She got up to pour him something warm. She did not look at the hall, at the door she had not yet opened, but she knew it was there. And she had stopped, somewhere in the space between the coffee cup and the question, and the answer that was not quite an answer yet. She had stopped waiting to know if this place was hers. She was already learning its sounds.